Hey guys, it's Logan here with Hydra572. While I was writing up the review for the Zero Tolerance 0350, a thought of mine finally crystallized. I'm not sure that we should blur the line between tactical knives and hard-use knives. This is something that you see pretty often in knife literature and advertising, knife reviews on YouTube, all sorts of stuff like that. People talking about the one knife that you're going to be able to carry in your pocket that's going to handle all of your hard-use needs, all of your needs to defend yourself, all those sorts of things. I think that when we get too far down that rabbit hole of trying to chase tactical, we tend to delude ourselves and really miss some of the fundamental design characteristics that would make a knife particularly suited for either one of those two tasks. First off, I'd like to lay down some ground rules. Whenever we make the concession that we're going to carry a folder for something like defensive use or hard use, we're making a pretty big compromise. I make this compromise myself. These are 3 folders that I've carried for defensive use. So I'm not criticizing anyone, I just think that we need to keep in mind that a folder, no matter how well designed, is not going to be stronger than a comparable fixed blade with a similar design that's also made well. Another thing that I'd like to keep in mind is, typically, I find when people talk about a hard-use knife, they're actually talking about something more akin to bushcraft. Or they have a specific task in mind. If you're a mariner, if you work on a fishing vessel, or if you have some other occupation or hobby that has some pretty stringent requirements on your knives, that's very valid. I just think that saying that we're going to use something for hard use is pretty vague. Most of the hard use tests that I've seen have been a little bit of hard utility cutting and then woodcraft. So, most of the time when I talk about hard use, I'm going to be talking about survival craft and bushcraft. If you have something else in mind, that's all very valid, and I think those knives are sort of more of a niche market. That's not really what we'll be talking about here. So let's go ahead and look at our first example. I have a couple of them for you guys. The first one is the Mora Knives Companion. I think that this makes a pretty dang good bushcraft, survival craft style knife. The only thing really holding it back is that I would like it to be a little bit longer. I'm looking to buy a longer version of their knife. But this knife is pretty dang good at bushcraft for a number of reasons. First off, it has incredible cutting capabilities. This blade just screamed through the tests that I threw at it. You guys saw that in the video. If you haven't yet, go and check it out. I thought it was a lot of fun. Second, this knife is very, very light. This is important for a knife that I might be taking backpacking, taking out camping, anything like that. If I'm not carrying an axe, it typically has to do with my size and weight constraints, and then the lighter the knife, the better. Another thing that makes this knife awesome is that the handle is sort of molded and soft, very comfortable in hand. It didn't tire out my hand because it was an easy shape to grip, and it didn't cut any ridges into my hand, didn't give me any blisters, anything like that. This knife did very well as a bushcraft, survival craft style knife. This knife would not do well for defensive use. I would use it if I had to. It does pass that test. It's certainly very strong in its construction, but it doesn't have a guard or a very good traction plan. I wouldn't feel that this knife gave me the most safety when I was using it to defend myself. If this was going to be a defensive style knife, I would like to see a relatively large integral guard that would protect my hand from somebody else's weapon. That would be really important for me because I don't think that I want to get my hand cut. That would seriously hinder my ability to defend myself. Protection is much more of a concern with a fighting style knife. This knife, well, when I'm using it, nobody's going to be attacking me, so it's okay, and I actually like being able to use that long extended Filipino grip. It lets me move my hand around the knife as I'm using it, try out different positions, and tire out my hand a little bit differently than if I was really locked into a certain position. Now I'll show you guys another example. Here we have the CRKT M16 Operation Enduring Freedom. They've put out this exact same knife for a couple of other overseas operations. It's a variant of their M16. This, I think as folding knives go, is one seriously good defensive use knife. Note the very large integral guard, a relatively secure locking mechanism. I would like it more if we did have a triad lock, but then we couldn't have our guard. It's a compromise. Folding knives are that way when you're talking about defensive use. I don't even mind the blade profile for defensive use. I would mind it if it was for any other kind of use, like utility cutting. That knife I pretty much only wanted to show you guys for the guard. So there are some characteristics that these two knives have to have in common. Both of them are going to need some pretty sizable blades and very sturdy construction. But really the similarities kind of stop there. There's an argument to be made that when you're using a defensive style knife, for an example, let's take out the K-Bar Zombie Killer, that you want a wider stock blade. You want more thickness right here. That's because it'll make the thing heavier, and it'll make it to where when you swing it down onto somebody's shoulder blade, you have a better chance of hurting them badly so that they stop trying to hurt you. That's pretty valid when we're talking about defensive use. I could certainly see an argument for wanting a slimmer knife that was more maneuverable, but I do understand why people like their very thick stock knives for their defensive use. The Mora knife, which was an excellent bushcraft knife and was certainly sturdy enough for those uses, is pretty dang thin. I might be concerned that if I was really planning on using this knife during deployment to defend myself as a soldier, I might be worried that if I went knife to knife with somebody that my blade would snap before theirs did if it was this knife against this knife. I think my reasoning's pretty obvious there. Gavku has done some really incredible testing where he's shown knives with very, very thin blades doing some really hard work in terms of woodcraft. I wouldn't want that thin of a stock if I was using that knife to defend myself. I just wouldn't. Also, reference the Cold Steel Voyager and its traction plan. It's okay if a defensive style knife has a little bit more of a hard choil to protect your hand, keep it from sliding forward, and a little bit more of a hard traction plan that could be harsh on your hand for long, continuous use, because most encounters where you're going to be using a knife to defend yourself are going to be very, very short. So it's okay if this hand position isn't exceedingly comfortable for a very long period of time. I probably won't be using it for a very long period of time to defend myself. If we had this sort of knife that we were intending to use for bushcraft, where I was sitting there whittling for hours on end, batoning for hours on end, holding onto this handle for quite a long time, then I'm going to want something softer, more rounded, easier to squeeze in a comfortable position, all those sorts of things. That handle design isn't going to be the best thing for my traction, for my hand protection. So I guess where that leaves us is, if you're a civilian consumer and you're a knife collector, buy the knives that you like, but also when you're making those purchase decisions, think about the tasks that you're actually going to perform with the knives. That's going to help guide your decisions. If you need a knife that's really, really good at being a utility cutter, not many of the knives that I've shown today are really going to fill that role for you. If you need something that's more woodcraft styled, really think about what characteristics you would like in the knife that you're going to use for woodcraft. If you're thinking about making a knife a part of your plan for self-defense, think about what characteristics you would like to better defend yourself with. Where that leaves us for people like, oh, I don't know, Air Force pilots that might need one knife to fill both of those roles, it's a very real risk for them that they might crash their plane and that they might have to use one knife as a serious part of their defensive and even offensive plan, and have to use that knife for survival craft, skinning animals, all of their utility cutting needs. Finding a knife like that is going to be very difficult. It's going to take a lot of careful consideration. I have two knives here that I'd like to show you that I think do pretty good at that. They're pretty similar knives. First is the Buck Nighthawk old version. This is before Buck and Tops made this knife a collaboration. The design is pretty dang similar. You see on the front we have a pretty considerable guard. On the back we have a good spot with a thumb ramp. We can use that Filipino grip if we want to. One of my complaints is around that thumb ramp. I would like to see that be a little bit more flat. But you see that we have a rounded handle with a guard so we don't slip forward. This is one good way to do this design. The guard is plastic, so over time, if you were to take multiple knife hits to there, I would start to worry about it, but I think it's going to protect you pretty good for those one-time encounters, which, to be honest, are considerably more likely, at least to my mind. Its sort of folding counterpart is the larger Hogue EX01. This is the 4-inch model. We don't have the guard here. We do have an interesting choil. It is a 3D machined style of choil, and I think it provides pretty good in-hand retention. Certainly we are missing the guard. That is a sore loss on a defensive style knife, but I do trust this lock mechanism, even with it just going into a steel plate in G10. I think you're going to see pretty good strength out of this thing, and I think you could use it to defend yourself if need be. Those are two pretty similar knives. Finding that compromise is going to be very, very difficult to do. And I think often knives that don't really work for me, that I think are way too heavy even for me, that are poorly designed, part of the reason is because they went down that tactical bunny hole where they couldn't find what they really wanted their knife to be. That's part of the reason that I didn't like the Zero Tolerance 0350, because, well, it was a 3.5-inch long knife that wanted me to believe that it was the best defensive use knife ever. That just didn't work for me. I don't think that works for quite a few people, but if we read those reviews, we get caught down that it's so tactical and it's all the rage and it's in my favorite magazine, then we start making purchase decisions that don't make sense. So that's basically the video. Those are the main points, that just really consider what you want your knife to be like before you buy it. Don't just go off of somebody's recommendation that, oh no, really, you can use this knife for bushcraft and survival craft. This is a strong knife. It's sturdy and well made. But it simply is not ideal for all the tasks in the world. It's okay to buy more than one knife. Believe me, it really is. You should try it. It's fun. But as those purchases start becoming more expensive, you really should factor in what you're using your knives for and what characteristics might help you pick the best knife possible for your money. Hope you guys have enjoyed the video. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned for more of the same.